right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders, and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD. Should probably add that part. Thank you all again. So this is a question and answer based podcast. Today I'm going to be answering a question from the archives. So somebody sent this question in, and I was lucky enough to have Kelley Franke jump on with us to talk about this question, to help answer this. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, go over to fearcastpodcast.com. You can click on the submit a question link. You can send me an audio question, which goes to the top of the list. You can do that over at Instagram. I am Fearcast Podcast over there. I post silly things every now and again. And or you can record your audio question and email it directly to me at questions@fearcastpodcast.com. So lots of different ways to get a hold of me. All right, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Kelley. I have not had it yet, just doing all of this pre-recording and all that stuff in advance so I can just focus on that conversation with her. But Kelley is a recurring person on this podcast. She's shown up a couple of times. Let me just tell you a little bit about her so we don't waste a whole bunch of time, and then we'll just jump into that conversation with her. So, let me just tell you, we'll just read her bio right here. So it says, Kelley Franke is a licensed marriage and family therapist specializing in mindfulness-based CBT with a focus on exposure and response prevention in adults, adolescents, and children suffering with OCD and other obsessive-compulsive spectrum disorders. Kelley's lived experience with OCD and anxiety and is especially passionate about working with postpartum and perinatal OCD. Kelley completed her master's in clinical psychology from Pepperdine University. During her graduate program, she worked as a behavioral assistant at the OCD Center of Los Angeles, where she then completed her internship and received her clinical specialized training. Additionally, she's received training in dialectical behavioral therapy from Behavioral Tech Research through the Lanahan Institute. Kelley is also the co-host of Purely OCD, a podcast on all things OCD. All right. So without further ado, without my further yammering, here is my conversation with Kelley Franke. Hey, Kelley Franke, thank you so much for joining me for the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
So glad you could join for today. I'm going to try to transition into this as professionally as possible because we spent probably half the time just goofing off, but that's very atypical for us when we talk. So we are always professional, talking about professional things. So I'm so glad that I could wrangle and trick Kelley Franke into jumping in to talk about this this person's question. Now, incidentally, I did look up the person's name. The person's name is Kelley. I didn't realize that before I jumped on. So we can call them Kelley. We can call them something else. Sandra, perhaps? I don't know.
Kelley's fine, but I guess it would be confusing.
It might be confusing. So we're going to say listener either way. So I will play my reading of it here in just a moment, and then we are going to jump into that. So here we go.
Okay.
I'm in my late 30s and have had OCD ever since I can remember. My son is almost 4 years old and I love him more than anything. I had an easy, relatively anxiety-free pregnancy and postpartum period. However, I found the toddler years very challenging, and over the last year or so, have had a really hard time with parenting and feeling an extreme burnout and exhaustion. The whole COVID situation and a false alarm with a potentially life-threatening medical condition and suggesting I might not be able to have a second child that turned out to be nothing didn't help. I've always wanted to have another child. During COVID and my health scare, I was heartbroken and terrified that either one of those problems would prevent me from having another child. But now I find myself seriously questioning if that is what I really want. My OCD has latched onto this with major rumination. What if questions and paradoxical scenarios at pretty much every moment of the day. Adding more pressure to the fact that I'm not exactly at an age where I can afford to, quote, wait and see if my feelings change, and I suddenly have an epiphany that I either do or do not want to have more children. How do parents with OCD cope with the intense ambivalence that comes with parenting? On the one hand, I dearly love my son and wouldn't change a thing. Other days, I feel so tired and burnt out from tantrums, lack of sleep, and also working full-time that I can't imagine having another child. My son is definitely challenging. I love him so much, but there are days when I'm exhausted to the core, where I lose my temper and feel utterly burnt out. There are other days when I really want to have another baby and feel like I can do it. And then there's the background pressure of knowing I don't have lots of time from a biological perspective to ruminate about this forever and ever. I guess my question is, how do you identify what you really want? I could just throw in the towel and say I'm done with having kids, but there's something inside of me that truly feels scared and heartbroken at the thought of not having another. How does someone with OCD approach this when there are genuine feelings of ambivalence there? I think this is a question that a lot of parents face, but it seems uniquely difficult for someone with OCD. I tried ERP with a therapist about 2 to 3 months earlier this year, mostly imaginal exposures and scripting, but I didn't find it helpful. So I'm excited to try inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy. I especially liked your recent interview with Carl Robbins and what he said about the trouble with imaginal exposures, and in particular, really resonated with me. So, Kelley Franke, thank you so much again to jump on, and Kelley or Sandra, whoever were the listener, the questioner.
Yes.
Thank you for sending in this question. And I think this is a question that I've absolutely worked with someone who has a similar question. Someone who has OCD, has a kid, is considering having another kid, and is just wrestling with what it's like not only to have OCD, to have a kid, and then to have OCD and a kid at the same time, and just all that comes with that. And I would love to hear what the Kelley Franke, the Great and Powerful, what her thoughts are on these things.
Well, I want to hear your thoughts as well, but I think it's an excellent question. I guess I'd like to start, I think, mostly with the rumination aspect of this, because if we're looking at it as through the OCD lens, is that the compulsions are the issues, right? And so per the listener questioner's comment is that they are spending almost every moment, I forgot the exact language, ruminating, right, over this. And they had tried imaginal stories, etc. But if this were somebody in my office, and I obviously, this isn't therapy or replacement for therapy, but if this theoretically was a client of mine, I would spend most of my time addressing the rumination, right? Because every given moment, this person's experiencing thoughts around, well, what would my life be like with the second child here? How would that look if the toddler's tantruming and I have a brand new baby that's crying? It sounds like this is a constant rumination going on over and over and over.
Right.
And so if we don't know how to deal with rumination, an imaginal story is useless to me. Actually, to be honest, I'd like your opinion. I don't use them a ton either, imaginal stories.
Imaginal exposures.
It depends on the person. It's very specific to a very specific crowd. And in this instance, obviously, it didn't work very well.
So for those who don't know what they are, imaginal exposures are an exposure technique that is quote tried and true, or is ubiquitous in ERP land, and it is writing out a story of worst case scenario from first person present tense. For the most part, you can be a little loosey goosey with it, but first person present tense, worst case scenario, and then after you write it, you reread it and reread it and reread it until your brain gets bored with it. Is the theory behind it, and a lot of people swear by it, and a lot of people just don't really care, and some people think they are actively harmful. So there are a lot of different perspectives that you can have on imaginal exposures, and it sounds like this questioner is saying they're not for me.
Yeah, and that is their right, and I respect it. And I actually think at any given moment, this person is experiencing an active exposure, literally all day long.
Yes.
And so their exposure or their response prevention to that exposure would be, I am going to practice letting go and not focusing and not going through the scenarios, and just refocus on the present moment. Because that will then leave room for a lot of anxiety, because their mind thinks, the OCD mind thinks, if I just think about this a little longer, I'll have more clarity. And OCD is a feeling problem, as you so know, Kevin, because you are the first person who told me this.
I say a lot of things.
Well,
some of it was helpful.
That was a very helpful one.
Well,
I think it's so on point, especially like even in this case, right? Is like this person is hoping for this feeling of certainty, this feeling of clarity, that there'll be this moment where they will just know for certain. And that is likely never going to happen. It certainly isn't going to happen if all we're doing is trying to figure out how we can get clarity, right? Zoom in. Really, we have to zoom out and let go of control, let go of trying to look and search for that. Right.
I love that we were talking about that in terms of like addressing that rumination. And for everyone we work with, we want to know like what's the function of that rumination? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to eliminate? And what is at risk with this? And I think we can gather is we're trying this person is trying to figure out whether or not, and maybe I could be wrong in this, whether or not they do in fact want to have a child, and whether or not it's the quote the right thing to do for them.
Right. And it sounds like historically they have wanted a second child, and they were deeply disappointed when they thought they couldn't physically have another child, but that turned out not to be the case. And OCD got his nose right up in it, or her nose, whatever we want to, its nose, whatever, got all involved in her story, which was so unfair of it. But that's how OCD works. It's like, oh, you liked something, you care about something? Let me tell you about why you should be second guessing everything now.
And here's why. Everything hinges on you getting this right answer.
I know. Or else. And that's the other aspect of this too, is there isn't a right answer. I think there's important considerations in having a child. Okay. Would you agree?
I would agree.
OCD aside, like, okay, right, do I have the financial means to have a child? Okay. This is problem solving.
Yeah.
There's a very open and closed case deal. We're not ruminating. Okay. Is my partner on board?
Great question.
Do I have childcare and support for child?
It turns out those paperweights take up a lot of time and need a lot of watching. They're constantly trying to kill themselves.
Okay.
You've seen them?
I know. I have one. It's crazy. You have too. So
they're more mobile. For the first couple of months, man, they just sit there and they flop.
Yeah,
they just don't do anything.
Yeah, they're floppy for sure.
But sorry, we're going through the points.
Okay,
there's a lot of things to consider.
There's a lot of things to consider. Yeah. This person also works full time. Now, usually you take some time off when you're giving birth to child. And you need a little time to recover. How much time do you need and want to spend with that child? Does your job allow for that? Right. Like these are all things to consider. Just a few. I don't know if there's others. I'm sure. Well, I know there's others, but you get the point. You get the gist. I think another important part is historically, this person hasn't had any real flare-ups. So that doesn't mean that they won't in the future, right? You can never know that. But it sounds like they've wanted this child. There's been no real issues. And that the only thing getting in the way is toddlers are freaking difficult.
Yeah.
And OCD is involved. So the toddler syndrome is enough to make you want to pull your hair out and be like, "What?" Question every decision you ever made in your entire life. Put your shoes on. No. Oh, okay. Put your shoes on or we're not leaving. No. Okay. So then, of course, you're going to be like, why would I do this to myself again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's what I love about this question is that there's so many different layers to this, and from if I was working with this person, I mean, along with catching from an OCD perspective, along with catching the rumination this person's going into again, it seems like trying to satisfy that question as to whether or not they do they really factually want this child? Is it the right thing to do? Is it the good thing to do? Does it truly reflect what they want in their life? All those questions to get an answer to that emotion of it.
Yes,
they ain't going to get it. But I think part of the they're not.
They're really stuck though on that one. Yes.
Yeah, they're not going to get what OCD is promising, which is if you just think about this enough and right, you'll get to that answer, so you'll know which direction to go. Because the problem, I think part of the problem is the human problem is. Kids are awful and they're great. They're the worst things on earth, and they're so wonderful as well. Do you want a second child? Yes, no?
She said it so much better than that. But yeah.
Yes, that's true.
No, I'm kidding. That's exactly how I feel. You're right. I would say the same. Is like they are the most challenging. Having a child was the most challenging thing, OCD in my life aside or not, ever. Yeah. And the best thing.
Yeah.
So you're in this moment of now what? Well, there is no right or wrong. We can certainly make thoughtful decisions like we had talked about. Like, do I have the means to do that? What does my career look like? How does that impact other child? But not to the point of like, now we're going to ruminate on it. No, it's like, there's a yes or no. There's a very short response time on this. It's like we either know it or we don't. We don't need to then imagine it happening and playing it out in our mind and going, well, maybe this is like, no, it's this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I also love within that there's, I think when you're considering having a second child in that is that you may not get to that full yes that I want this, because you have to also acknowledge all the bad stuff that is going to come along with that second child. Absolutely. And do you want that part? No. But to say that but that's part of the process is that to get one of those sides of the coin, you have to get the other side of the coin. And there is going to be losing your temper. There's going to be being exhausted to the core. There's going to be days that you just love that child and you just want to snuggle them and they're adorable. And that's what it means. So that rumination, I think, is where they're getting caught up in it. I think as Kelley said so clearly, they ain't going to get that. So it's that toss-up.
Yeah.
It might go great, and it might be awful, but there's no amount of rumination, and there's certainly no amount of scripting that's going to get you to either full peace with the awful part or an understanding that everything's going to be fine, or confidence that everything's going to be fine. I think you can be confident that things are going to get real weird real fast. I
feel confident she's there. She has arrived to this point of, I don't even know my name anymore, right? Like she's questioning something she's never questioned before. Right.
And it is, I'm curious if Kelley, if you can tell me about this, how does, in what ways do you notice the stressors of raising a kid impacting anxiety? In what ways do you see it impacting anxiety? And that can either be generalized anxiety that we all experience. It could be specific to OCD. And then are there specific things that you found to be helpful in your life in dealing with a kid? I hope that's a good question. That's a it's question that can be questioned.
It's a fine question. Just kidding. Are we talking about my personal experience or just in general? Because I feel like, those are two different things.
Well, now I'm curious about how they're two different things. How about more broadly?
Well, because my experience would be with OCD is all.
Okay. Would you be able to answer from that perspective, if that's all right?
Yeah. Well, for me, my OCD was attached to my child. Mm-hmm. And it varied depending on the day. But the main one, and the one that is here probably forever, off and on, is, am I emotionally harming my child? Mm-hmm. And so the way that this listener was describing it, it kind of resonates with me. It's just a different topic, right? And I assume with a lot of people with OCD, but because there's a child involved and you're making a decision and you're like, is this the right decision for this person and for me and my family? I relate to that. Is every decision, I feel angry because this kid isn't listening to me. Mm-hmm. And does that mean I should have never had a child? Mm-hmm. Right? Am I a bad person? How come other people can handle it and I can't? That one is also a big one. It's like, why do I lose my temper? Because nobody talks about it, actually.
Yeah.
Until you start talking about it, and then you realize, oh yeah, everybody does lose their temper.
Everybody.
Yes.
Everybody. Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. By the way, everybody out there, if you want to know more about Kelley Franke's story, you know what you should do? You should head on over to the OCD Stories, where Kelley Franke was featured on an episode. So it's fantastic. But where was I going with that? Oh, but I really appreciate you going through that or sharing that, because there can be that, it sounds like there's that anticipation that this is a thought that's going to show up. And it can result in, questioning yourself, judging yourself, criticizing yourself, and all of that pulls you away from the experience you're having with your kid.
It does. It rips you from the present moment and honestly, clarity.
Yeah.
And rational thinking.
Right. And I've talked to a lot of parents about this. I don't know if you've experienced this, but it's like you're then experiencing two games or two worlds. You're fighting this experience in your head with the thoughts and the obsession and trying to put those to bed or answer those or shut them down. And then you're also externally trying to manage this completely irrational human that is not doing what you want them to do. And if they just did the thing, well, we could get on with our day, but you're playing these two games and it just burns you out. It's trying to solve two different math problems at once.
I'm actually feeling anxious just thinking about it. And here's, I don't know if this is helpful at all either, but I think at some point I wanted another child, but I have, health issues that don't allow for that. Mm-hmm. Okay. And in that, I found a lot of peace because I was like, that decision was certain. And I was like, well, I can either be stuck on what I didn't have or what I couldn't have and be really upset and maybe depressed and get into that realm. Or I can find peace in this and go like, okay, well, actually, maybe this suits my lifestyle better, right? It's like I have my own business and I want to be really good at that job, right? And that's going to require a lot of childcare, and I want to be really hands-on with my child, and that means I would be robbed of that, and that was really important to me. But I also don't have family around, right? You have to pay somebody to take care. Like everyone's different.
Yeah.
Right. But I also know that if I were maybe choosing the other path and I was able to have a second child, let's say that did happen, it would also include difficulties and beautiful things too, right? So again, you're never going to have, there's no right answer. There isn't. And the more we move to accepting that, I think that in accepting also like feelings, we don't follow feelings. Fear doesn't make the decision. We're never going to have clarity. You're not going to feel probably any level of confidence until you drop rumination and really, really lean into that.
Yeah.
Because you're resigning to the fact that you're like, I don't know the answer, right? So that's an exposure in itself.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I love and what you said in that is a very present-based approach to it, and letting go of potentials and theoreticals and what could have beens, and instead refocusing on what is.
Yeah.
What is your child and the life that you can have and the experiences that you can have with that child. Because there's always that question of, well, what could have been, what might have been if I'd done this or that or changed that or did this other thing, and maybes. But we can get lost in those. And, it sounds like to a certain degree, that's what this listener is doing, or this questioner is doing, is going through all those situations to consider what would be the right thing for them. And I think in that there is no clear and right answer. I often talk to folks that if there was a clear and right answer, you would have found it already.
Oh, yeah.
And you would have done it. And you wouldn't have written me this question.
Yeah.
Right? You would have done it. But because there is questions and anxiety and you're going back and forth, it means that there isn't a right answer. So to a certain degree, we just have to choose. And then the question is, how do we deal with the future of potential disappointment? Yeah,
that's a great point.
And I wonder if that's what they were trying to get at with some of this exposure, is like, how do we tolerate future disappointment and get used to that idea? Perhaps. And I don't know exactly what they were talking about for their exposures or what they were doing with it, but it's one, you could say this is the best decision that it could have made, is to just have the one.
Right. I think you can find peace in either. Yeah.
Because we noticed this weird experience when we brought that second kid home. There was that immediately, and I didn't consider this before, immediately, once I brought the kid in and I saw my first, there was an immediate distancing. It was, I cannot give my first all the attention and affection and love that I had done for 2 years by then.
Yeah, I know.
And she noticed.
I know. See, that would have messed me up so bad because of my OCD.
And I don't have OCD, and it messes me up.
I know.
And it's hard. There is a reality of that, but there's also the reality that, they are also, now that it's been, numerous years.
But they are okay. She is okay.
they are okay. I mean, they are okay-ish, right? Like, but they are.
She's not like, daddy and mommy did this to me. How could they?
No, I don't think it's that's going to make her a stripper, if that's what you're wondering.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying, is like, it's not hinging on that exact moment.
Right.
But it feels heavy. And in that exact moment that you felt, it was heavy.
Yeah. But in that, there's a difference. There's that question, and we've talked about this on the show before. It's like, I don't know how I'm going to deal with all the problems and potential problems in the future, but I'll find a way to deal with it.
But you have confidence that you will rise to the occasion.
And I'll do the best that I can. It doesn't mean I'll do the best.
You'll do the best that you can, and that might include burnout. I think that's what we sign up for as parents.
And so some of that, I think there's 100% a reasonable conversation to have as someone who's considering having a second child, is when burnout happens, what are we going to do? right?
Yeah. What kind of support do we have? Does my job allow me to maybe take time off in those moments? I think those are important problem solving questions that can help determine that. But if we're looking for clarity or a feeling to make the decision, you're already making the decision by not making the decision, which is you're not having a child currently.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I think to that, I don't know how much you can speak to the ICBT part where they're really jazzed on that. People say that, right?
Yeah, jazz. I use it all the time, but maybe we're really old.
No, it is the kids who are out of touch.
Telling yourself that.
I do.
Okay.
You know what? Here's the fun part, though. If I say it enough, my oldest will say it. She says "bruh."
Oh, so I know. That one kills me. I'm like, do not say that around me. I can't.
I've tried to do this when I leave the room. I'll say deuces. And my wife goes, don't do that.
Please don't do that.
Because
I support her.
You're all right. Both of you are correct.
I might text her right now.
I just want to know what silly things I can get my child to say. So, and that is what will make her a stripper. But going back to this, I think the work that you might do from an ICBT perspective is looking at like what are the thoughts and the considerations and the stories and the possibilities that are leading to this feared story that you're having, and how can you break that down into figuring out what's concocting this feared narrative, so that you can see that feared narrative, likely speaking, in kind of what you and I have been talking about, it has nothing to do with her reality and the truthfulness of her now or in her future. The reality is something that is completely unknown, but OCD, through a combination of associations and stories and possibilities in movies, and that friend that thing that their friend said that one time, leads her to say, oh my gosh, this terrible thing is going to happen. A terrible thing might happen, but right now it's a story. So let's stay here in the moment and wait until the future, until we see whether or not it is going to happen. And then we'll deal with it.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure Carl Robbins, who probably listens to every single one of these episodes, is just sitting there going, you got it wrong. I don't know what he's doing. So he doesn't do that.
No.
But yeah, what are some things? I know that we probably have to bounce out of here pretty soon, but I'm wondering what are some tips or some things that you might give this person to consider as they're moving forward? Are there closing thoughts that will absolutely fix this person's perspective and to give them the confidence to move forward in their life with whatever direction that's going to be?
Oof.
Fix this person, go.
Yeah, I mean, that was really a lot of pressure.
If you had a billboard.
No, stop, Stu.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay. I mean, I don't think that there's anything I'm going to say that is very profound enough to alter this person's experience. Okay. But I would say that you need to ultimately make the decision of yes or no. And the only way you're going to do that is through checking and acknowledging, I'm ruminating right now in this moment. It is happening. Acknowledge it's happening. Resist rumination. Come back to present moment. So now we're back into our life where reality is happening. Mm-hmm. And do that enough times over and over and over again, you will get a little more space so that you can have a little more clarity. But again, I don't think we can go ever off of a feeling to make our decisions ever, right? It's like, like as if there's this moment where I just go, oh, you know what? Today, I want to have a kid. It's not going to happen.
Right.
It's not going to happen because now you know what it's like to be a parent also, and it's challenging. So now you're signing up for 2 and you will likely be okay. there's a lot of joy that comes with 2. The other one, we can go sit here through pros and cons of all, like the other one has a best friend or someone they can torment or whatever. They can entertain each other, right? Your life's fuller. There's all these aspects to it. And then there's all these other positive aspects to being an only child too, right? Like you get your full and undivided attention from both parents.
Yep.
And there's a lot of cons to that as well. So I'm sure you have deliberated in your mind 1,000 times over and all of that. I think being compassionate too is really important. It's like, oh, wow, I feel pain right now. Yeah. I'm ruminating and I feel pain here. Pain is present.
Yeah.
It's going to be okay. I'm here for you. Right. Taking pause is really important.
Yeah.
Even when you're burned out too, by the way.
Yeah.
Not just OCD wise.
Yeah. I think it's beautiful. I think there's not a right answer to it. And I think that's an important point to come to and to sit with. That there is not going to be a right answer. There's going to be the answer that you choose. And there's going to be a lot of pros and cons that come with that. And that will be for the future. Yeah,
that'll be for the future. There's going to be a version of you that doesn't know whatever choice you didn't choose, if that makes sense.
Right.
And yeah.
Have you seen About Time?
No.
Okay. It's the same folks who did Love Actually.
Okay. And is it a movie?
It's a movie. It's about a guy who can time travel.
Whoa.
And he kind of goes back and forth with what was it like to have a child and to not have a child.
Wow. It's like Quantum Leap. But
yeah, if you want to cry your face off, go ahead and watch that movie.
Oh, it's
yeah. So don't. Let's just not.
Yeah.
So stupid.
Duh.
But
I thought we were friends, Kevin.
I know. I'm so sorry. But I'll send you a copy. It's going to be fun. So the whole point is that to the listener, part of the decisions that we make is not to reconcile fully one thing or another, is to kind of, with decisions like this, recognize there is no good decision.
Yeah.
And that's your reality. So how do we move forward with a choice and to know that it's not the right answer, but it's the answer that you've chosen? And we're going to see how that one shakes out. And when it gets weird and when it gets wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, that will be our life then. And in that moment, you've got more choices to make, right? Am I going to take that child and chuck him off a shelf, or chuck him off chuck him off a cliff? Or am I...
Or a shelf.
Or a shelf. I don't know. If you're on a shelf, that's fine. But if you're like, are you going to do that? Or are you going to practice patience and kindness and self-care and all the things that you would want to be, all the things that reflect your values? But that's for that moment. And there's a lot of those moments, and some of those moments you're going to get frustrated and lose your temper. And hopefully you don't throw your child off a cliff or a shelf.
I mean, it is an option, but not a good one.
But it's an option.
It's an option. Also, I'd like to just also say that toddlers are not permanent. They aren't. True. And that was highlighted a few times, is like, I love my child. Mm-hmm. And believe me, I know how many times I have tried to sell myself on that story. I love them so much. And I just want to throw my head through a window right now. Is totally reasonable. That's normal and healthy thoughts and feelings and behaviors.
Yeah.
And they are not going to be like that forever. He is going to grow up a little bit more now, and he will be less challenging. And then the second one will do it to you too, and you'll feel the same way. Mm-hmm. I mean, Kevin knows more than I, because I have one.
And I'll be asking you how to deal with some of the older kid stuff, because your kid is older than both mine.
Correct. So, but I think you got it.
Yeah. So, all right. I think we've yammered on enough. What do you think?
Okay. Yes. I hope that they found this helpful. And I'd love to hear follow-up questions, and I'm happy to answer them.
Love it. Yeah, that's always going to be my question. So if you have further questions, send them on in. I will trick Kelley in, and she will come on 4 years later, and we will make it happen.
Yeah.
So,
or I can send an email.
Or you can say that too. If you really want to hear a fun episode, go check out the first episode that Kelley was on, and it was the week before COVID hit. And we made a lot of very distasteful jokes about COVID because we didn't realize it was going to be a real thing.
Yeah, we didn't know the gravity of the situation.
And as it turns out, it was a lot bigger than we thought.
You think?
A little bit. So our silly little jokes, and it was so bad. By the time I published it, it was so bad I needed to do a preface on the episode.
I know.
Like, hey, everybody. So we made some silly jokes. So if you're panicking and stressed, and if there are people in the hospital, we are sorry for those jokes. But I haven't gone back to re-listen. I wonder if some of those jokes still hold up. They probably don't.
I'm sure that they're great. I mean, I was also coming off of a very bad sickness. Yeah. It was January, actually. So
that's right. It was.
Yeah. And the same is happening now. I was coming off of a sickness. January seems to be the month for me.
Well, I mean, I just got bronchitis, so that's something.
Great, Kevin. Now I'm anxious about you.
Fine.
Good.
I'm fine. All my lungs and lung are fine.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I will let you go. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com, or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at fearcastpodcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously.